The year was 2018, October 2018. The flight was scheduled to depart from Trichy, India to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Trichy or Tiruchirappalli is a major city in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu and is an administrative headquarters for the district. The city is credited with being the best livable city and the cleanest city of Tamil Nadu. It is also regarded as the 5th safest city for women in India. Once part of the Chola kingdom, Trichy is home to some of the most beautiful temples and fortresses, a place where there is a long and interesting history. One of the symbols of Trichy is the rock fort, which is a fortress that stands atop a 273-foot high rock. Dubai is the most populous city in the United Arab Emirates and is the most populated of the 7 Emirates of the UAE. The 7 Emirates are It is home to the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa, which is 828 meters tall. In the recent years, Dubai has grown from a small fishing village in the 18th century to one of the most modern and safest places in the world, with a focus on tourism and luxury. The aircraft that they were using was the state-of-the-art Boeing 737-800. In recent times, Boeing has been under a lot of public scrutiny, and in this particular case, we are going to see how resilient a Boeing aircraft really is. The captain was 32 years old, about 4,300 hours of flight time, most of which was on the Boeing 737. He was a fairly new commander with about 550 hours as pilot in charge. The first officer was 51 years old with 4,200 flight hours, with most of it on the Boeing 737. The first flight was mundane and uneventful as the first officer flew from Dubai to Trichy. Once they docked into the parking bay, the passengers disembarked. During the walk around, the engineer found out that one of the landing gear tires on the right hand side was worn out, and so they decided to change the tires. As they are preparing for the return leg to Dubai, they begin writing down the weather conditions. The wind was calm, making the captain choose runway 27 for departure. Why did he choose runway 27? Well, departing from runway 27 provides them with shorter track miles for departure. As they were calculating the speeds, they decided to use flaps 5 for takeoff. 130 passengers boarded the plane as they were preparing for departure. At 12:40 AM local time, the pilots taxi out to the runway to begin their departure. The captain then advances the throttle to 40% N1 initially. For the Airbus A320, an aircraft similar to the Boeing 737, the thrust levers is set to 50% N1 initially. The question is, why do the pilots do that? Well, they want the thrust to spool up at the same time as they set a higher takeoff power. Not doing this will lead to asymmetrical thrust that will affect directional control during the takeoff roll. So far, the pilots are doing everything according to procedure. However, that will change very soon. Once the thrust is stabilized at 40% N1, the captain pressed the toga button and set takeoff thrust. Both engines then started spooling up to 98% N1. So when the captain does this, the auto throttle will be set to N1 mode. As the plane accelerates and goes from a low speed regime to a high speed regime, the auto throttle goes into throttle hold mode. This means the pilots are able to move the thrust levers manually as desired. This is a safety feature so that in case of a high-speed rejected takeoff, the thrust levers will not move up again. When the pilot is on the takeoff roll, he will have his hand on the thrust levers until V1 speed. Then, at V1 speed, he will let go of the thrust levers and get airborne. Most airlines only allows the captain to perform a rejected takeoff. Keep this in mind as this will be super important later on. As the aircraft was accelerating and the speed was about 170 knots, the aircraft has entered into a high-speed regime. This is a critical phase of flight. But something surprising happened. The backrest of the captain's chair collapsed and the captain slides down. Normally, when the person suddenly falls, he or she will tend to grab onto something. In this case, as the captain was falling backwards, he pitched up slightly and he inadvertently reduced the power from 98% N1 to 77% N1. At the same time as now he could not see the runway, he shouted to the first officer, "Your controls!" The first officer was taken aback by this sudden change of events, seeing the captain collapsing and also he being handed over controls at very high speed. Being in this state, he did not notice that the throttles have been moved backwards and that they are not having optimum power for liftoff. The captain took 5 seconds to compose himself, and by the time he could see the runway, he realizes that there is very little runway left. The captain said, "My controls," and took back controls, and at rotate speed, the speed where a pilot can begin a rotation for takeoff, he started pitching the aircraft 14 degrees and the aircraft started lifting off. As he did that, he found that he needed more force than necessary to get the aircraft airborne. As the aircraft got airborne, both pilots felt that something is not right. The aircraft started vibrating heavily. The captain then called for gear up, and then from this point saw the power at 77% and then decided to increase back to 98% N1, which is the optimum power for the climb out phase. The pilots then started cleaning up the aircraft using a soap and a sponge. Just kidding. I mean, they started cleaning up the aircraft by retracting the slats and flaps. At the back of the cabin crew felt a bump as the aircraft was lifting off. The cabin crew thought that there are some baggages in the cargo compartment that was shifted. Can you actually guess what happened? Well, if you enjoyed watching this video so far, do toga the like button and subscribe. I appreciate you. Thank you for your time. And now, back to the video. Back in the tower, air traffic control was quite concerned as some of the equipment stopped working, mainly the localizer signal of the runway. The localizer signal is especially important for pilots if they want to perform an ILS approach. What is an ILS approach? Well, do check out this video here to know more. And so, the air traffic control dispatched a team to check out the localizer antenna, which was situated at the end of the runway. When the team was sent to investigate, they discovered something surprising. Some parts of the localizer antenna was missing and there were some debris scattered around. There was also a brick wall that surrounded the perimeter of the airport, and they spotted 2 holes on that wall. The tower then proceeded to contact the pilots and told them that the aircraft had departed at the end of the runway at very low altitude. The pilots then told them that nothing is wrong with the aircraft. All parameters and system displays look normal. 2 minutes, the air traffic control got back to them and said that the compound wall at the end of runway 27 was broken. The pilots then repeated themselves and said that everything is normal. However, a few minutes later, the pilots asked the controllers again about what has happened. The tower then told them that while they took off, they hit the localizer and boundary wall and the localizer antenna broke. The pilots then thanked the controller and continued climbing. So as they were climbing, the pilots proceeded to check the system parameters again. They checked the hydraulic readings to see if there are any leaks. They checked the engine numbers to see if it was performing normally. And most importantly, they checked the pressurization systems to see if the aircraft was being pressurized normally. The pilots then decided to level off the aircraft at flight level 210 and started slowing down. They extended the landing gears and retracted them again to see if the gear system was working. The gears operated normally. Because all indications seemed normal to them, the pilots then decided to continue the flight to Dubai and started back to climb to their cruising altitude, which is 35,000 feet. Halfway en route to Dubai, the pilots are still discussing about what has happened. They know that the wall is broken and suspected that the aircraft is probably damaged. Meanwhile, the airline was quick to react and proceeded to check on the damage that happened on the ground, the broken antenna, the bang-up wall, etc. They also discovered parts of the aircraft near the site. The airline company then decided to contact the pilots and tell them to divert to Mumbai. So, this is the tricky part. Obviously, the airline wants the plane to be in Mumbai where there is better ground support and the company engineering team would be able to have a look at the aircraft. But they are much closer to Dubai. In fact, they were already near Oman. Initially, the pilots was apprehensive as to whether they can make it to Mumbai with the fuel remaining. They then decided to request for a straight routing to Mumbai and then proceeded with the diversion. The pilots then prepared the aircraft for landing and requested for firefighting services in Mumbai, just as a precaution. When the aircraft docked at the bay, they finally discovered the shocking truth. The aircraft was severely damaged. The back part of the lower fuselage was actually ripped off, and the beacon light was actually destroyed. The VHF antenna was also gone, and the main wheel was damaged. The back stabilizer has sustained some damage, and also parts of the number 2 engine cowling was ripped off. There are also some dents to the flaps. At the departure end of the runway, investigators saw some tire trails and also the aircraft belly markings on the ground. The wall had 2 holes, probably due to the impact by the tires of the plane. There are some wire mesh found on the aircraft tires once they landed. The investigators then took a look at the captain's chair. What they found out was that the backrest of the chair would remain too tight. So instead of the recliner being locked, when one of the claps catches, it remains partially open. Once the investigators have some idea on what actually happened, they started recreating the same events in the simulator. They found out that if the first officer rejected the takeoff, the plane would be able to stop given the runway distance remaining. If the first officer then decided to take off, had he added thrust, the aircraft would have been able to take off normally. They began playing out further scenarios. When the captain took over controls and had he applied full power, the aircraft would have lifted off normally. But had he rejected the takeoff at that point, the aircraft would have overrun the runway. What was puzzling for the investigators was that why the pilots did not return to their departure airport. The information that the air traffic control gave indicated that a tail strike had happened. If we look at the Boeing aircraft checklist on tail strike, there is a caution note there. It tells the pilots not to pressurize the aircraft. Pressurizing the plane may cause further structural damage. It then tells the pilots to perform a 3-step process. The first step is to select the pressurization mode selector to manual mode, and the second step is to open the outflow valve switch. Similarly, when you are letting air out of a balloon, you are deflating the balloon. So when you open one valve on the plane, you are creating a small hole in order to allow pressurized air to escape. The third step will be to plan and land at the nearest suitable airport because the aeroplane has already sustained a structural damage. Now that is for a Boeing aircraft. What about an Airbus aircraft? Well, the concept is the same. Airbus QRH, the quick reference handbook on tail strike, tells the pilots to land ASAP. The maximum flight level is 10,000 feet, and to minimize the climb to 500 feet per minute. It then says to limit the descent rate to 1,000 feet per minute because huge pressure changes for an unpressurized aircraft can be very uncomfortable for humans. And maybe animals too. The checklist then says to switch on the ram air push button, which is to create a hole to let the air out. And then the checklist continues with the instructions that pack 1 and pack 2 must be switched off. What is pack? Well, do comment below if you know the answer, or watch this video if you want to know how the pack works. The pilots then told investigators that they then proceeded on to continue to their destination because all systems look normal and that it appears that it was safe for them. Mind you, when the incident occurred, the pilots are under a lot of stress. Sometimes it is easy to think things in a logical way when the environment is conducive. When a person is put under a lot of stress, sometimes judgment can be impaired. As this was also a night flight, flying at different times could also affect sound judgment. This was also the second sector for them. I learned a lot from reading this investigation report, and it was a valuable lesson for me. Thank you very much for watching. Do comment and subscribe. I appreciate your time, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.